All right, hello everybody, and welcome to, I think this is our third live Spring Hill webinar, and I'm really excited to have the chance today to talk with Ken and Elle Campbell, and we've got them right here, and they're sharing a couch, sharing a camera because they're married to each other, which is really sweet, and excited to have the chance to talk with them about they're really like small groups experts, so we're going to talk some small group stuff as that relates to experiences at camps and retreats, and we hope that you'll enjoy just listening in on the conversation. If you do have questions you want to ask us to talk about, you can click the Q&A app in the broadcast here, and you can ask questions, and we'll try and answer them for you live. So we're excited to be talking, and Ken and Elle and I were talking just before we went live about how this conversation has sort of evolved on what we're going to talk about. So we're going to go a lot of different places, but would you guys just start by introducing yourselves to us and to the audience so we know who we're talking to today?
Sure. We led the middle school ministry at our church in Buffalo, New York for 9 years. So we just actually finished that run. So we were in Buffalo our whole lives, grew up there, been married for 8 years almost, and have been doing ministry now.
8 years?
Yeah, he got it. He did good.
Yeah, I think. Almost. Coming up. So anyway, we love middle school kids. We've been going to camp with them forever. And now we just recently made the move down to Atlanta to join the Orange team. And so now we're doing that. So now we're creating resources for other church leaders and being a part of that. You want to say a little bit about what you do?
I think you did a pretty good explanation, but just to fill in the blanks too. So when we were at our church, Kenny was the middle school pastor, and then I did small groups stuff. So yes, my angle is always going to be for small groups because those are my favorite things. And now at Orange, we still get to kind of do a lot of the same kind of things that we love to do in Buffalo. So we're both focusing on middle school stuff, and I'm focusing on a lot of small groups and small group leader stuff. So it's been really fun.
That's great, and I'm excited. We're going to be in the same room here. I think this weekend we'll be at the Middle School Ministry Conference. You guys are still coming, right? Yeah.
So excited.
That's awesome. So that'll be at our Spring Hill camp in Seymour, Indiana, just south of Indianapolis. The Youth Cartel, our friends Mark and Adam put that on, and excited to be there and sharing with a bunch of middle school pastors. And then we'll connect again at the Orange Tour at Woodside Bible here next Monday evening and Tuesday. What are you going to be talking about at the Orange Tour?
So we're doing, I think at Detroit, I'm not sure exactly which breakouts we're going to be leading yet, but there's kind of 3 that we're doing at different stops. So there's one that we're doing that's for small group leaders, and that one is like how a small group leader as a volunteer can partner with parents of students.
Okay.
So we're going to do that one. Then there's 2 others that we are kind of working on. One is like how to create safe places for students, physical safety, but emotional and relational safety too. And then there's another one on how to recruit better volunteers and small group leaders. So
great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it's going to be exciting. I'm excited to connect with you at those 2 events, and I know a lot of our the youth pastors and children's ministers that we work with will be there too, so it'll be a great opportunity to connect. But I want to start our conversation because we want to talk about kind of the place where kind of the reality of this small group mentality comes together in a camp or retreat setting. And so I know you guys, as middle school youth pastors and working with those students have, taken a lot of kids to camp, to retreats, programs like that. Talk to me about your priority for experiences like camps and retreats, and what are you thinking about as you're getting ready for those types of programs?
Sure. Well, when we were looking for a camp, we really wanted it to connect with what we do the entire school year. So we didn't want just to be something we bring kids to and then we leave and then there's no long-lasting connection to it. So for us, our ministry, and we've said it, mentioned this word a million times already, but small groups. So for us, small groups are like the backbone of our ministry. Mm-hmm. And so we try really hard to put students around an adult that cares for them, that thinks about them, that prays for them, that hangs out with them, and so that really builds that relationship long term. And so for camp, we were looking for a camp that had that same kind of mentality, where they embraced the small group structure and where they invited small group leaders to be a part of the camp and not just be like chaperones or help run the camp, but actually go to camp with their students. And so that's what we were looking for. And so we found a camp that did that close to us. We're from Buffalo, so we found a camp that was just a few hours away from us that we could drive to. But yeah, that's what they embraced, and so we kind of bought into their strategy.
Yeah. So you're getting ready for that, and you start to gather around you those adults who are going to come along. Who are they? They're your small group leaders then? What does that look like?
Yeah, so for us, we had a team of small group leaders, and we were at a somewhat larger ministry, so we had a lot of volunteers. And what we were trying to do was to identify the small group leaders who had a lot of kids going to camp and to make sure that they were there. And so there was kind of like a twofold thing. Sometimes it was kids just kind of going to camp, regardless of whether or not their small group leader was going or not. And so in that case, we would find out who those kids' small group leaders were and be like, hey, are you going to camp? We would love for you to go. We'll pay for you to go. We want you to go. And then on the other side, it was small group leaders who already recognized the value of camp, and they actually would take the initiative to kind of get their small groups and be like, hey guys, let's do this. This will be a super fun week that our group can spend together, and just to kind of get some of those like extra quality moments together. Because showing up on a Sunday morning every week, even if they show up every week for the entire year, that's awesome, but that kind of relational investment outside of church just goes a lot deeper and makes a bigger impact if they can be there for that. So that's what we were pushing for.
Yeah, that's so great. I know a lot of our churches, when they're getting their students ready to come, they're sometimes scrambling at the end to find, just enough adults to make it work. But when you have adults who are investing in those students on a regular basis, then that can be a part of that experience, and you sell really the value of what happens for them ahead of time. It really does change the dynamic for those churches when they're here at camp. So when you get the kids to camp, talk to us about how you're working with those small group leaders to really support them at camp so that they can be successful, because they may be used to 30, 45 minutes, an hour and a half at a time, and now they've got 35, 40 hours with some kids, or 4 to 5 days for a week-long camp. What's the support system look like?
Yeah. So the camp that we partnered with is called NTS. It's Never the Same Camp, and kind of the way they structure their programming is they make sure that there's training and support for small group leaders that come. So they allow a certain number of small group leaders to come for free, and then we actually sponsor the rest of them. Like, we don't let leaders pay. We want them all to come for free. So they're not missing work and having to pay to be there. So it's built in where there's small group time, so they'll actually get small group discussion time with their students during the day. They'll get training during the day from like a speaker that they bring in just for the small group leaders. So someone who has experience in small group ministry and volunteering in church and leadership and that kind of stuff. So they'll bring them in just to train the small group leaders every day while they're there. And that's part of the support that we give them.
Yeah, and the other part too is having a mixture of structured time and unstructured time for small group leaders, because you want them to have like the unstructured time to just like play and have fun with kids, but you don't want them to be like stranded, like, okay, I just need a break from these children, please get me away. So yeah, just based on like the different types of programming they offered, really helped our small group leaders stay sane for an entire week at camp with middle schoolers. So there would be large group, small group, games, your typical camp kind of experience. But just the thing we appreciated about the camp we went to was just the focus that they had on making sure that the small group leaders who were there were just kind of staying healthy and staying like awake and well rested. So they also would give our small group leaders, I think it was just an hour of like break time every day. So they would take kids and put them in breakout sessions. And while the kids were in breakout sessions, it was like free time for the leaders to go sleep or eat breakfast slowly without getting Cheerios thrown at them or whatever else. So we really appreciated that they kind of took care of our leaders for us.
Sure, yeah, and investing in those leaders that they're healthy, that creates a better experience for your students as well, and makes them, helps them stay engaged with your students. So you guys mentioned you come from what you described was a little bit a larger ministry, right? And I'm assuming that in your time there that you saw growth in your ministry. We have a question here from Carly who's listening, and she just says, how do you handle the catch-22 that you find yourself in as your ministry grows in student numbers, but maybe small group leaders don't? So how are you working to kind of manage that growth, stay ahead of it in terms of training, and get more of the right people involved with your students for camp, but also for a regular, on a regular basis at your church?
Yeah, well, that's actually a great question, because when I first started, Elle was not on staff with me. So it was me on my own trying to figure out what the programming is going to be, what games we're going to play, what message are we going to talk about, what the small groups are going to look like, investing in our volunteers. So I had a lot on my plate, and it was not smart of me to keep that all on my plate, and I didn't do a good job of giving that to a different volunteer or hiring a staff person when it was necessary. So what ended up happening was I walked in one day to our youth group setting, and there were 85 middle school boys and only 2 volunteers, only 2 small group leaders for those 85 boys.
And that math, that does not equal a small group. That is like,
yeah.
That is a gigantic mob of people.
That was when I realized, okay, I'm not doing a good job here of investing and pouring and training and retaining the small group leaders and the volunteers that we have. So what we strategically did was handed that part off to somebody else, and that someone else ended up being Elle. And so when she came on to our staff, her whole job was just to oversee our small group ministry, to make sure our leaders were healthy, to make sure the dynamics and the numbers and the ratios were working. And so kind of what we started implementing, and Elle, you can talk about this a little more too, is we created a place where small group leaders love to be. We made sure we were giving them free food and drink and giving them gifts and showing our appreciation and just making them know for sure that we appreciate and we love them, and in turn try to give them as healthy as possible small group situation so that we didn't have as much turnover, leaders leaving. And in fact, they started inviting their friends and saying, hey, you should come serve with me because it's awesome and it's fulfilling and it's fun. And before we knew it, we had a lot more volunteers with us just by trying to change that culture. Mm-hmm. And then there's some more strategic things we did to attract leaders and when groups got bigger and all that, but you can talk to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great kind of place to start when your ministry is growing. I think no matter what, you're always going to have growing pains of not having enough volunteers during the growth process. So I think you just have to kind of know that there's going to be a season where you're going to be strapped for people. But like Kenny said, I think it's that whole idea of creating an environment where your small group leaders know that they're valued, because when you create this environment, it does attract more people. Because if you imagine, like, if you have a culture of volunteers that's just not healthy, nobody's going to want to jump in on that mess with you, especially if they're like, wow, like that volunteer to kid ratio is like really bad. So if you've got that going and your current volunteers don't feel appreciated, people are not going to want to jump in on that with you for the most part. So if you can create a culture where they want to be, even when you have these like ratios between adults and students that maybe aren't where you want them to be, if you can cast that vision to be like, hey, this matters to small group leaders and let them know that they're valued, then I think they'll jump on that bandwagon eventually. But there will be some painful times.
Yeah, and what we did too was, as a group was getting big and you saw it growing, we would ask that small group leader, like, okay, hey, you're almost to the point where we might want to split this into 2 separate groups. So would you find somebody to co-lead with you for a little while, and then when the time's right, you guys can split the group up. And so that was a great way to get friends of leaders plugged into our ministry, because we're like, hey, find someone, you must know somebody that would love to help you. And that's how we added a lot of our small group leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've also seen that a lot of times the camp experience or retreat experience on a weekend can be a good time to give some of those new leaders a chance to really launch relationships with those students that they're getting to know. So maybe not the first introduction, but a great place to really build those relationships, because they have as much time together on a weekend retreat or a week long of camp that that they might, similar to what they might have in months or a year of ministry back at home at the church. So using those camps and retreats as a strategic opportunity to really develop your leaders and foster relationships with the students as well. So we talked about a minute ago about kind of the reality of use your small group leaders, and not just kind of random adults, random chaperones, as the key people for your students at camps and retreats, things like that. And that's actually number one on a list of 10 things. I think is this list in your recent book, Al?
Yes. So back in April, we released a book. Reggie Joyner, Kristen Ivy, and I kind of put together this book that is, we wanted it to sort of be like the handbook for ministry leaders to just kind of create a healthier small groups culture. So we talk about a lot of things. We talk about how to structure your ministry as a whole. We talk about how to empower leaders. We talk about how to create the actual small group experience in a way that is appealing and effective to kids. But one of the things that Reggie Joyner kind of put together in the first section of the book, in the structure part, was just how to think about your programs and your events, and specifically your summer camps, not as just random programming, but as part of this like bigger strategy that eventually pushes kids towards small groups. So kind of what he was pushing for was, whatever you do, let there be a point to every piece of programming that you do, and let that programming be small groups. And so what he did was he put together this list of 10 things, and it was him and Ben Crawshaw, who is, he's the creative director for our high school curriculum at Orange, and Kevin Ragsdale, who is at North Point in Atlanta. And so the three of them and some other people kind of like sat in a room and just hashed out, like, what are the things that make churches really effective at doing summer camps that support small groups? So yeah, they came up with 10 things. Do you want to go through those?
Yeah, let's do it. So the first one was what we just talked about, was that you got to engage small group leaders and not just random adults and chaperones, and that's so important, that to maximize that time away. What was number two?
Number two is main sessions at camp, so your production, that they're limited in like the big production, and they give time that complements small group. So basically just the idea is it's not all about the person on the big stage, it's not all about what happens in that big room, but that there is time and that there's energy focused around putting kids in small groups to kind of wrestle through the stuff they hear in the main stage.
Yeah, and that's something that we have seen recently just become so powerful in our preteen retreats of 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, where we really work to not just have small groups be something you go later and do and talk about, but we build the teaching, we build the programming in such a way that it sets up those conversations. So the primary illustrations, set pieces, all those different elements kind of come together to really set them up for a great and effective small group time. What are some of the things that you guys have seen that really make that work?
So there's a few different things, and Kenny was the communicator primarily at our church, so you probably have some stuff that you can kind of say to that. But just in general, I'll kind of say one thing that we would encourage our communicators to do, both at our church and something that we saw that happened really well at the summer camp we went to, was that the communicator wouldn't land the plane, if that makes sense. So like the communicator's role when they're going to be followed by small group is more to set up this feeling of tension and not give every piece of application, not give every answer to every question, but to kind of let kids sit with a bit of the tension so that they can go resolve it in small groups. So that's kind of one thing. Yeah,
part of the communicator's role is really to introduce the question. So, if you're talking about whatever, you're talking about lying, then maybe you don't land in, this is why you shouldn't lie, and this is, how some people lie or whatever. But you ask the questions like, why do you think it's a bad thing to lie? And then you kind of let those questions happen in small groups. So as a communicator, it's tough because you want to give all the answers, but sometimes it's better to let students discover those answers rather than you just telling them what the answers are. So and we had a lot of different communicators that we would bring in to our, like, volunteers at our church that would speak to our middle school students. And so that was the number one thing that we coached them on, was don't give them all the answers. Like, your job is to set up the topic, to expose them to the questions, and then let them figure out and discover those answers on their own with their small groups.
That's great. That's great. So number 3 says that resources are provided during camp to enhance the small group experience. What are we talking about in terms of those resources?
Yeah, and that's actually something that we would have available even before we went to camp. So small group leaders, if there was like a little book or whatever, but would have the discussion topics before we got there, so they were ready and prepared to have those discussions if they needed to do some more quiet time on those things, or research, or figure out what they wanted to talk about specifically, and kind of just like not surprising them. So like, after the talk in the main session is like, okay, now go talk about what we just talked about.
Right.
And now they're like, I don't know what to talk about. So it was really providing them with something where they could be prepared and feel ready and feel supported. So it was really kind of just hashing that stuff out beforehand, so there was no surprises later.
That's great. That's great. And I think the next thing, number 4, is that those small group leaders are both valued and trained during the camp experience, which we talked about a little bit before, but looking for opportunities to use that camp experience to help them be better small group leaders and be prepared each day.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that the camp we went to did really well was they were very intentional to say, like, hey, these people who are up on this platform, the speakers, the worship band, we put them here because we like them, but we know that they're not going to be the people who are investing in these kids for the long term. So one of the things that they did was during the camp week, they had a little like photo session with every small group leader and just took their picture. I think this year it was a video actually, but they would just kind of get every face of every volunteer. And then they would, on the last day, they would put up this kind of slideshow of all the small group leaders. It was cute, like the kids would cheer and just all that stuff. But it was just a great reminder to small group leaders and to kids that it was the small group leaders who were going to have that long-term influence in kids, and not the camp staff, or even in a lot of cases not the youth pastors, if they've kind of empowered the small group leaders to do that.
Yeah. Great. What about number 5?
Number 5. Build the experience around age group focus for relevance. So Elle mentioned our camp did breakout sessions, and so that was really the time where we got age group specific. So there were middle school breakout sessions and there were high school breakout sessions, and I know of camps that even go beyond that where they do each grade. So seniors have their own time together, juniors, and that way you can really get as relevant and as personal and as best as possible for that specific age group. So we just think that's an important thing. So it's not just random kids together, random ages that are going through different things, but if you get kids together that are struggling with the same type of stuff, that really makes for a better experience.
Yeah. Now, number 6, we already talked about. Speakers are coached so that messages really set up the small group times, and how valuable that they're not standalone things, but they're really an integrated whole part of the curriculum. But number 7 says activities or mission opportunities are organized around those small groups. Tell us what you mean there.
Well, so there's a ton of different directions you could probably go with that. With our summer camp, and I think it just depends on the context of your camp, but one of the ways that we know some camps will kind of encourage kids to take the camp experience beyond camp is to do things that are like service related. And basically it's this idea that if you are going to do some kind of activity or some kind of like takeaway, that if you can think about it in the context of small groups rather than the whole youth group together, that you have a better chance of making it stick because it's more relational. So one of the things our camp did was they gave us these envelopes, and the envelopes, they were like unmarked, and it was just kind of a challenge, like, hey, if your small group wants to do something for others, like when you go home from camp, take one of these envelopes and open it up when you get it, and if you take the envelope, then you are committed to doing that. So you better take it, and you better mean it if you're going to take it. And so small groups would take those envelopes and just kind of see whatever that cause was or whatever the thing was that they were being challenged to kind of champion, is that then became their small group project to do when they got home from camp. So it's just kind of taking it a step from beyond something your youth group can do together and just getting it more focused, more personal, to kind of build up the small groups and let them do that instead.
And we talk about the camp high where kids get really passionate and they get dedicated when they're at camp. And this is just another way to kind of focus that mission when you leave. So like, hey, remember that time and that experience you had at camp and you were like sold out and ready to do whatever God called you to do? Well, here's an envelope with something inside of it. Now you can go do something. And so it was just a cool way to keep that going throughout the school year and have like a secret mission or like a project that they were going after during the year.
That's great. That's great. Now, number 8 says that churches are provided with a follow-up curriculum for small groups after camp. So, in your experience with the week-long summer camp programs, you're taking all of your students together. That's can be a powerful, very intentional sort of part of the experience. I mean, it's a big deal. What did you guys? How did you do that? How did you continue that after you got home?
Well, one of the things that our camp did was actually to provide small groups with an actual small group curriculum that they could do when they went home if they wanted to. And they were really cool. I mean, they were these little booklets. I think they cost like $1 or $2 for kids to get. And basically, they just had all these topical different discussions. And they had, strategically throughout the week kind of plugged these different devotionals and different resources so that, by the time kids went home, they had some familiarity with it. But they were called Don't Climb Alone, and they're just these little small group, workbooks, basically. There's a leader guide, and then there's student guides. And it's just a way for small groups to kind of pick a topic and to just continue that process after camp is over. So it was really great that, our camp provided that. Not every small group used it, and that's okay. But I think even if your camp doesn't provide something, just that whole idea that if you have approached camp in the context of small groups, that the theory is those small groups will then continue to go home and still be together. And so if that's the case, then it's just a matter of leveraging those small groups to continue and knowing which small groups were at camp and just kind of saying like, hey, maybe it's a follow-up from whoever the staff person is who's overseeing small groups, like, hey, as a small group leader who is at camp, like, what are you guys doing? Are you still doing that service project together? How are you continuing that conversation? So it could be something really tangible, really practical, or it could just be the church staff kind of being intentional to follow up with that.
You mentioned number 9 on the list is a targeted social media strategy designed to engage parents as well with camp during camp, and I assume then after you get back home to keep the conversation going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we believe that small groups are extremely important, and along with parents. So we actually say they're the 2 most important people in the church, small group leaders and parents. If you want to reach kids, those are the 2 most important people. So for us, like fun ways to engage parents is we let them know the hashtag as we go to camp. So as we're Instagramming pictures or whatever, tweets and videos, and they can follow along the whole week and see what's going on at camp, and that prepares them to have that conversation later at home too. So maybe we're tweeting or Instagramming part of what the discussion is, part of what the topics are that they're covering, so parents are in the loop with it the whole time, and they can be praying and they can be ready when their students come home to continue that conversation. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a tool that we created called InstaFeed Live, and it's a way to use an Instagram hashtag to create a slideshow. And so you can give your parents the domain to that slideshow, and every time someone uses that Instagram hashtag, it just gets added to that slideshow so parents can follow along and just go to that domain and watch the slideshow of what's going on at camp, and it's pretty cool.
That's great. So you're keeping parents involved in kind of the life change that's happening at camp. So we're not going home then to, different environment. We're not going back to the same old thing, but we're going back to mom and dad who've maybe seen a little bit about what's already happening and have a starting point for engaging that continuing conversation. Number 10 on your list says logistics are organized so small group leaders can stay focused on relationships. You've given us a couple of ideas before about giving them a break, so that they can get away from all the, the kids for a few minutes. What else are you talking about there?
I think part of it is not giving them other jobs to do. So, let's say you're doing your own camp. You're like, it's easy to say, hey, I've got all these small group leaders and they can cook and clean and help me run and organize the logistics of the camp. But I believe, and I think we believe, that that should be for some other volunteer. The people that are small group leaders, let them stay focused on being the small group leader and try to get someone else to do the other stuff. That's like the logistical part of camp.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Well, we've been talking primarily about the context of small groups and the camp experience, but these sorts of ideas and the importance of small group integration applies not just to camps. We talked about retreats, but all kinds of other events that you do in the church. So as you do other strategic events in your ministry and engaging small groups, what are some things you've seen really work well to bring those together?
Well, one of the events that we did, we stole from our friends at North Point in Atlanta. They did this event, and it was brilliant because really and essentially to pull the event off, it was pretty much free. So of course we want to do that. So they called it Double Dog Dare, and basically the idea is you're using social media to kind of get kids to interact not only with your ministry but also with their small groups. So what they do is they challenge kids and they challenge small group leaders, have a sleepover on a Saturday night. In their context, as in ours, our middle school service was on Sunday morning. So the idea was do a sleepover on Saturday night, invite your friends who don't typically come to church, and just have a fun sleepover. And you're going to do this like fun dare contest together. So these small groups would get together, they'd have a sleepover, and then starting at like 10 o'clock or something?
No, even earlier. Like let's say starting at 8 o'clock, and every 15 minutes we would post a dare on Instagram, and they would have to respond. And then use our hashtag so we could see it. So it would be like, give us your best Sharpie facial hair. And so they would like Sharpie someone up and put facial hair on them, and then take a picture or a video and use our hashtag. And so there would be like, let's say 10 of these dares throughout the night, like go into your fridge and try to hold as many items in your hands as possible. So you've got kids with like their arms out trying to hold like bread and eggs and all this stuff.
My favorite one was take a picture of your parents without them knowing.
Oh,
and
no.
This is a sleepover. Kids are like taking pictures of their sleeping dad, like, hey dad, like a selfie with their sleeping father. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, but it was a great way to get friends that don't come to church over your house, have fun with them, and then the idea was to invite them back to church with you in the morning, and we would see everybody's pictures and give away prizes for our favorites and all that kind of stuff. So it was a really successful event for us.
Yeah.
And something that we definitely will do every single year.
And the beauty of that is not just because it's essentially free. I mean, kids are just hanging out at their houses or at small group leaders' houses, so no cost to us, but it built up the small groups because those sleepovers happened in the context of small groups. So it was just continuing to reinforce those relationships and to leverage those strategically.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're running out of time. Ken and Elle, thanks so much for being with us. How can people find you? They can find you ellecampbell.com?
Yeah, ellecampbell.org. And what I'll do actually is whenever this video is live, I'll embed the video there, and I'll put those 10 questions up too, just in case people want to do a little evaluation, because I like evaluations.
Yep, and they can find us at stuffyoucanuse.org. So stuffyoucanuse.org is kind of our home base for all the tools and resources that we create for youth pastors. So
more great ideas like the hashtag sleepover. That's a fantastic idea.
Exactly.
Cool. Thanks for sharing with us. I'm looking forward to connecting with you guys in person this weekend at the Middle School Ministry Conference. If you haven't signed up for that or registered for that, but you live near Indianapolis in the Midwest, it's not too late to register. It's at campference.com or org. I don't know. Go to just search.
Like
the only conference in existence. You can find us there, and we'll see you guys at the Orange Tour at Woodside Bible on Tuesday, the 13th and 14th. Monday, Tuesday, 13th and 14th. Looking forward to that.
We're going to be best friends after this, Eric.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Time.
Yeah. We'll have to. I've been practicing my emoji sharing on my phone, so that's learned that from my good friend Elle. And also, if you're listening and looking for a place to bring your students to camp here in the Midwest, Spring Hill Camps, we have coming up our preteen retreats for 4th to 6th graders the first 3 weekends in November. We got winter teen retreats in January, February, and March. And we are doing, I'm encouraged to say, we're doing a lot of the things that Elle and Ken just told us about. So a great place to take your small groups and students, small group leaders away for a weekend and get that camp experience together, foster relationships, and really a shot in the arm for your ministry for students of all ages. So we're looking forward to connecting with you there. Again, thanks, Ken and Elle, for being with us. I appreciate you taking the time today, and we'll look forward to more great ideas from you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Very good.
All right, thanks, everybody. See you later.